Everything that I've seen of XR, everything that I know of it, it's an organisation that is fueled by caring for the planet and for each other and for the unborn. So this is Howell. In the original film, he was played by Michael Sheen, so if this gets tedious at any point, just imagine Michael and it'll get so much better. Here's the thing. How exactly would you say does an idea begin? Where does it all start? In one woman's brain, one man's heart? Doesn't seem likely, does it? I mean, all of us are fueled by the thoughts of others, by what we've read, gleaned or seen. Take all this, healthcare, medicine, didn't just rise from nowhere, did it? Someone, somewhere, I always think, back across the millennia, must have been the first to lay a hand on the wound of a stranger. In a cave maybe, with ice at its mouth, a fire beside, or perhaps later in a hut or a shelter, wherever, whenever it was, someone must have been the first to offer comfort beyond their tribe. Not because they had to, or should, but because they could. Someone else again would have seen that, watched, learnt how to do the same, what staunched the blood, eased the pain, and so it must have begun within us, not so much an idea as an offering. A caring chain of practice and knowledge, a refusal as a species to just lie down and take it, but rather through attention, intelligence, care, foster a belief in our agency in life. Our ability to pit our empathy and wit against sickness, disease and death, the trials of the body and the brain, to say when things go south, no, not this. Thank you much for that. And I'm going to finish with a new poem called Term. It's a poem that takes as its starting point a scan that we had of our second daughter at 28 weeks. She'd had lots of scans by that point, so they'd stopped being wonderful for me, which is kind of extraordinary. The concept of seeing your unborn child have become quite ordinary. But as you'll hear in this poem, my unborn daughter pulled me up short on that account, and in doing so, also presented me with other questions, which are certainly the questions which brought me here into the XR movement. So this is called Term. At 28 weeks we conjured you again, suspended in parts in each dark frame of one long concertinaed ream, a profiled skull, a snub-nosed mask, a skeleton palm held up against glass, a marionette's leg of fibula and femur. A vision of which our parents never dreamt, the bones of the future in the present. So why was it then, only weeks later, I finally took the time to look? What can I say? There's always a reason not to pay attention. You're our second, and here's a hard first lesson. There's something about the adult brain, a curse, a gift, I'll let you choose which, that can't sustain the marvelous for long. But then, as if in answer to these thoughts, you offered up, halfway down that chain, flesh, not bone, your lips and nothing else, adrift in all that dark, pale and parted, as if to ask a question from the womb, but also somewhere further on. Another time, years from now, when you'll be fully grown. I stand in our kitchen, the window black with night, staring at your unborn mouth, open as if for breath, and can't help but wonder to what degree will the question on your lips be weighted with admiration or with anger? In what measure thanks or blame? What phrase might it contain to describe these years of squander? And if it should, God help us, be specific, ask what it was we did, where we stood, and what we said when the forests burned and the reefs were bleached. Will we, my daughter, have lived a good enough answer? Thank you much.
Thank you, Owen. This is incredible. Look at this concentration. You're absolutely amazing. We're in the middle of Trafalgar Square, everybody. Oh my God. for creating another world with these words. And now I'm incredibly excited because somebody who I think is just wonderful is going to come and speak to you. Listen, I'm just going to say Ali Smith.
Hello. Here's a short story about the long, long view. Once there was a small gang of kids, maybe 7 or 8 of them. Look, here they come right now, roistering round the corner with their arms linked, past the lamppost, past the waste grounds left over from bombing in the last war, past the past, past the crazy money towers of the Boris Johnson city, past the present, because they're on their way to the future, and they're pals for life, and they're forging along the pavement, and beneath their feet the tarmac is cracking open, and you can see the earth beneath every road, and on they go. They're singing this song, a simple song. It goes, "One planet Earth. There's only one planet Earth. One planet Earth. There's only one planet Earth." And they don't know it because they're young, but that song's tune is an old one. It's the tune of a song called Guantanamera, about a place in the world that's beautiful, though nowadays cynical people have turned it into the foulest sort of prison. But that old song's words hold the place's history. That old song tells the story of an old truthful man who's dying, and he wants to tell the story of his soul and the place he lives, and how those two things, the soul and the place, are rooted together. He sings about the sea, and how he particularly loves the beautiful little mountain streams, and how what's wounded in life can come to the mountains to heal, and how all things grow, whether they're flowers or friendship or understanding, and how the way to deal with the bad times and with the cruelty of cynical people is to turn to the earth, cultivate its beauty, help it grow the most beautiful things. But back to that gang of kids singing and forging ahead along the pavement, because behind them, look, now, there is a swell of people, a swell that started as a stream and is now the size of a sea. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people, more and more. They're all the people rebelling right now across the world at how this world's being treated. All the people who give a damn. People of all ages, genders, persuasions, shoe sizes, and they're walking alongside more than 1 million kids, all refusing to go to school till their countries get educated about what's happening to the planet. And look, the plants and flowers that know they're threatened are pulling their roots out of the ground like they've just heard the mythical Orpheus singing the best ever song, and they're hurrying along in the march too, dragging dribs and drabs of earth and clean soil all across the city. They've got their branches round the shoulders of those singing kids and the shoulders of the people who are giving a damn, and with them, all round them, baying and barking and mewling and squeaking and growling and flapping like a massive Noah's Ark parade are all the creatures of the earth, air and sea, who know they're likely to go extinct pretty soon too. The leopards and rhinos and orangutan and gorillas and turtles and tigers and elephants and porpoises and wild dogs and ferrets and whales and huge tuna fishes with blue fins and chimps and bonobos and penguins and dolphins and pandas and sea lions and seals and sharks and hippos and iguanas and bears and polar bears standing on a sliver of ice and jaguars and plovers and bison and foxes and macaws and tree kangaroos and butterflies and salmon and frogs, and right at the back the sloths. And they're all and not just that, the air itself and the sea and the earth, they all join the march. And above that march too, the invisible, evanescent, prescient spirits of all the already extinct species, the gone mammals and insects and fish, the dead plant life, the burnt black trees and creepers waving their ashy leaves, and with them all the spirits of the people who have already perished because of what's being done to where they live. And even some life forms from other planets are zooming down through the galaxies and joining the march. They can't not, because it's so obvious. Even they know too. The only song the cosmos is singing as they march along, there's only one planet Earth. There's only one planet Earth. One planet Earth. There's only one planet Earth. And those kids at the front of the Great March on their way to the future stop right outside the seats of power, outside the houses of government and the banks and the offices of the huge conglomerates and industries and media giants and tech giants and oil companies, and they square up to the politicians and to the rubbish world leaders and the CEOs, who are all looking pretty embarrassed, pretty shifty, the smirkers and the shirkers of real responsibility. And those kids shout, and everyone and everything on the march, those lives and lost lives, everything joins the shout, and it's a huge shout from the heart of the actual world. They shout, cut the emissions, cut the crap, tell the truth. And then they settle themselves down, like you all, because they're not going away till this is sorted, because this story hasn't got an end, because everyone in it who gives a damn is working against the kind of end that ends everything. So, with all their patient urgency and all yours, all the urgent patience we have, we sing it again and again and again in one harmonized, massive, mass voice. One planet Earth! There's only one planet Earth! One planet Earth. There's only one planet. Planet Earth.
Let's hear it for Ali Smith. And for Scotland. Oh my God, how good is this? In Trafalgar Square with Ali Smith. This is all too exciting. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Leone Ross is a novelist, academic, short story writer whose first novel, All the Blood is Red, was shortlisted for the Orange Prize. Here she is, Leone Ross.
Evening. At the same moment that I realised I wanted to pee, I realised I was on After Ali Smith. Good evening. I'm going to read you a horror story. I think this is pretty relevant. A bit of it, a truncated version. Every year I have the honour to teach 75 creative writing students, and I learn so much from them, and I wrote this story from them. This is bits of it. It's a horror story. It's a diary of 53 sections written by a young woman at the end of the world. I'm only going to read some of them. It's called Fix. 2. I got you food, Mum. My parents' generation had the Twin Towers attack. For us, it was that sentence out of one small, homeless girl, her face spread across the live screens around her, offering her mother food after a day out begging. I got you food, Mum, she said, and offered the slice of meat, charred on one side, raw on the other, and we saw the bloodied bandage on her arm. 4. There are apples in my fridge. I keep meaning to eat them, but they're too pretty and I don't trust them. 5. We beamed that kid and her carved arm out to millions. Her little face trying to smile, her blonde hair still in the piece of flesh, cooked over a fire in good British air. But the cannibalism wasn't what frightened me so much that I stopped being frightened anymore. How dreadful, people said. And there were marches and riots. Yeah, thousands of people for calling for change. And not a thing behind their eyes. 6. When did we truly run out of compassion? How did we do it? They said it was too many sins dressed up as entertainment and not enough books at bedtime. The soullessness of capitalism, plastic surgery, body dysmorphia, and the growing incidence of rape victims feeling nothing at all, and the mercilessness of people starving. But none of that ever explained it for me, and that was only part of the world anyway. 7. Gone too far to fix. That was what my Jamaican grandma said when she was faced with utter madness. A neighbour splitting his wife's head open, all for the sake of his ego. Or yet another banker bitching about his £5 million bonus. Gone too far to fix, my love, oh Lord. I want to remember her face. 9. Mum says we started to die the day we threw the paper books away. The raising of the last libraries didn't even make the news. It took less than 3 generations of children online to wipe out the part of the brain that is hardwired for awe. 39. The girl in green shoes and a tiny jeweled bag, you know the type, barely holds a lighter and a condom, but that's not necessary anymore. Everybody knows you fuck, you die. There are too many diseases not to know that. The girl wore a purple paper crown with the words, I am 20, written across it. Happy birthday, I said. She smiled. Her eyes were gold oil, no whites at all. 40. I've never been in love. Whisper it, never, never, and I'm just alive enough to be sad. 41. I hear there are pockets of determined, feeling revolutionaries hidden in the mountains, in Greece, France, Australia. I don't know where they are. I couldn't find you a mountain in London. They say that the trick is to throw away the computer, tear out our TVs, chop the fridge in two, don't pay the electricity bill. Other people say that mindfulness is essential in the fight against them, or fall in love. They keep your eyes safe. 42. I've never been in love, but my best friend's eyes are gold. There's a couple of guys I used to fuck and their eyes are gold. My local butcher hacks pieces of meat and winks at me with his yellow eyes. Hello, darling, he says when I pass. And if you didn't listen carefully, you might even believe he felt something. Hello, darling. Nobody talks about it. Even before my friend's eyes turned gold and I tried to say something was changing, they just laughed. There she goes again, they said, always trying to save the world. And Leanne, my best friend, grabbed me round the neck with her arm and wrestled me to the ground, smooched me on the side of my head, then made me a cup of tea, milk, 2 sugars. She still makes me tea now that her eyes are gold, and it tastes the same. 43. Last week, I lost my mother. It was her birthday. The stars align and they come for us. Who knew the astrologers were more than just a joke in old women's magazines? Who knew the press could die, said my mum. I tried to talk to her about it, but she wouldn't. I don't understand why I'm the only one talking. 45, the apples in the fridge taste like the water in the tap, and I don't know if it's just that it's apple tasting water. I know I'm not crazy. 46, demands for therapy have decreased by a massive 45%. Decreased. If you don't feel, it's a blessing. To help bad childhoods, marriages, pasts. Why care? Why worry? Why ponder? Why rage? Why eat or drink or fuck or talk or kill or fill your mouth with drugs to assuage the pain when you have the perfect piece of very little anything at all? But they do say our brains are changing. Whole pathways being wiped clean. Whole areas falling dead and still. We are more clever than ever though. Average IQ points up, up, up. 47, my mother's shoulder blade shuddered. Happy birthday, we sang. And baby girl, she said, like she was searching for me in the dark, quaking shoulders, 3 fingers clawed across her own neck. Everybody laughed and my mum stopped screaming and gave me birthday cake. Taste it, baby, and her eyes were gold. 50, we're being fixed, like my grandma taking all the pills in the house, which is when my mum stopped feeling. 51, feelings cost too much. 52, better to fix things. Thank you.
Beautiful. Here we are in Trafalgar Square, but you've got to think that at the same time, there's XR in Mexico, there's XR in Berlin, there's XR in Amsterdam, and our next author, Chloe Aridjis, was born in Mexico, went to Berlin, lived in Amsterdam, and now happily she is part of us. She's here tonight, author of 3 novels, and she's going to talk to you now.
Event I was at was in August in Mexico City, where we were campaigning outside the Brazilian embassy, because there's just certain leaders who seem like beasts of the apocalypse trying to hasten our end, but we all let them. And I would like to dedicate my talk to José Luis Álvarez Flores, the Mexican environmentalist who was recently murdered in Chiapas. He was best known for creating a sanctuary for howler monkeys, lost his life fighting against illegal mining in the region. When I was growing up in Mexico City, I was often haunted by headlines about the destruction of nature. Tiptoes. Air pollution levels in our city were so high that birds dropped dead from the sky and sea turtle slaughterhouses bloodied the sands of the Pacific coast. And in the early 90s, the lagoon where the migratory gray whale... What? Speak louder? Okay. Sea turtle slaughterhouses bloodied the sands of the Pacific coast. And in the early 90s, the lagoon where the migratory gray whale breeds was under threat of being turned into enormous salt works. Relentless logging claimed the lives of millions of monarch butterflies that had flown to Mexico to overwinter in our forests. Everywhere one turned, the natural world was under siege. Is that thunder? Oh, no, it's not. In 1985, my parents founded an environmental group called the Group of 100, originally comprised of 100 artists and intellectuals. They forced the government to address the deadly pollution and successfully campaigned over the years to close down the sea turtle slaughterhouses, cancel the salt works, and establish sanctuaries for the monarch butterfly. We saw how a collective conscience and a collective voice could force politicians to take action. Nature is speaking now. Yet these victories were often partial or short-lived, and the degradation of nature continued. Economic interests triumphed over any attempt to protect whatever existed for its own sake rather than for human benefit. It became more dangerous to speak out. After 30 years of campaigning, and after receiving death threats for his activism, my father said, "I have often felt like Sisyphus, confronting the same environmental problems over and over again. We sometimes seem like madmen tilting at windmills. Although the plant and animal species we defend, or the rivers and forests, will never know we defended them, often at risk to our lives, we must continue. We mustn't ever stop our tilting at windmills, especially when our very existence hangs in the balance, and that of millions of other species. And while climate change is an interaction of forces we've unleashed in ways we don't even fully comprehend, the acts of destruction we commit are another face of the human propensity to wage war on nature. This week alone, news came of a ship from Peru that was seized transporting 12.3 million dried seahorses to Asia, where they are incorrectly regarded as aphrodisiacs. In Mexico's Sea of Cortez, the vaquita porpoise, the world's smallest and rarest cetacean, hovers on the brink of extinction, with at most a dozen individuals left. In Taiji, Japan, pods of dolphins are intercepted on the migratory routes and herded into a cove, where a few are selected for aquariums, and most of the others are slaughtered. These stories may seem anecdotal alongside a dying planet, but we are seeing more than ever how every loss in the plant and animal kingdom reverberates across the globe. There are no more isolated reports. Everything feeds into one vast departure. Even if the human race were to survive against all odds, I personally would not want to live in a world drastically impoverished in every sort of wildlife. As a writer, you often feel under pressure to come up with original ideas or new ways of expressing a thought. In the context of the climate emergency, however, I find myself repeating the same things or else repeating what others have said. It's fine to feel like an echo chamber. Nature has been sending us stark warnings for decades, but it's become clear that she requires human language and action, loud and unyielding, to get her message across, until governments and corporations snap out of their self-serving slumber. Writers are used to inhabiting a strange zone between myth and reality. Some of us have envisioned dystopian futures from the safe place of our writing desks. Centuries ago, pre-Hispanic storytellers paired every creation myth with one of the apocalypse. These scenarios seemed fanciful at the time and remote. Yet now many of these myths, ancient and modern, seem close to acquiring substance. It's hard not to be plagued by nightmarish visions of poison seas teeming with skeletons and debris, plastic debris, of arid wastelands devoid of animals, of uninhabitable zones where thousands of life forms once thrived. None of us would want to live in such a world, and yet that is where we're headed. Only together can we halt this apocalypse, slow the devastation, and defy the prophecies.
Thank you, Chloe. Lots more writers backstage. There are writers in the audience too. I'd like to bring one up now. She's sitting just in front of me, author of The New Feminism, On the Move, Feminism for a New Generation, Living Dolls, A Quiet Life. Please welcome Natasha Walter.
Thank you. It is amazing to be here tonight for all of us. But for me, maybe particularly extraordinary, because on the last time I was here was on Monday. And I was lying about there, and there were about a dozen policemen around me. And then suddenly there were about 4 policemen taking me to a van that was parked just behind there. And then I went to the police station and so on. And what I remember from the moment of arrest, it isn't the fear or the discomfort, it was the amazing solidarity and the love that the people around me showed. So I want to thank you all. This rebellion is amazing because of you, because of the rebels who've come together and taken these streets. And for me, to see this space that was full of police and full of fear, now filled with joy and hope and peace and stories, is just incredible. So I'm going to read from something that I didn't write myself. It was written by my father, Natasha Walter, who was active in the peace movement of the 1960s, from this pamphlet called Non-Violent Resistance. Because I think that those of us who are engaged in civil disobedience in this rebellion, we should remember our long history and the people who came before us. Let us never forget the power of disobedience. The myths of Prometheus and Adam and Eve, the revolt of the small against the great, are some of the oldest and finest myths of all. And mythological disobedience is not mere nihilism. Prometheus brought fire to the earth. Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge and did not die as their creator told them they would, but their eyes were opened. Disobedience, said Oscar Wilde, is humanity's original virtue. It is through disobedience that progress has always been made, through disobedience and through rebellion. Failure always haunts rebels, but we aren't dead yet. And while there is life, there is hope. And each step we take bears witness to that hope. Gandhi said, "A non-violent revolution is not a program of seizure of power. It is a program of transformation of relationships. A tiny grain of true non-violence acts in a silent, subtle, unseen way and leavens the whole society." And our task now, maybe, is to sow these grains. And this is what our movement is trying to do. I love the fact these words were written in 1963, and yet they feel like they're written for the rebellion today. Whatever doubts we may have about the effects of our resistance, our rulers seem to have none. They drag us about and throw us into puddles and fountains, and fine us and caution us and imprison us and fear us. And while failure may haunt me, any person's rebellion strengthens me. We shall go on making our point until it is taken. We are a few? Yeah, we're many, right? But a happy few. We are in debt, but not in despair. I like to read that like we're in debt to those who came before us. We make mistakes, but people who don't make mistakes don't make anything. We're not yet grown up, but we will never stop growing. We are one-eyed, but we are living in the country of the blind. We are neurotics who defy our political parents, but they are psychotics, building worlds of fantasy which will collapse around themselves and us. We are amateur incendiaries, but they are professional pyromaniacs. And we are living in a world where faith is always misplaced and hope is always betrayed. And somehow we are managing to keep faith and hope alive. There is something here, right here, created yesterday and creating tomorrow. But today, the struggle. And the struggle is people against obedience, people against death. And the story isn't over yet. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The past in the present. The past in the present.
We need some arrestables at the front here, please. Can you follow me?
We need arrestables.
We need arrestables, please, quite urgently. Only 4 or 5, just to slow things down a bit. Could you? Any arrestables? Could you follow me, please?
We need arrestables, ladies and gentlemen. Please follow the man with yeah, he's over there, yeah.
Any more? 1 or 2 would be great.
Any more?
Anyone, please? If not, it's okay. No? No one?
Anyone else?
No volunteers for being pinched?
I'll go, but I've got to keep this going. Courage. So much courage here. Next, I want to introduce Matt Thorne, author of numerous novels, including 8 Minutes Idle and something I really want to read is a biography of Prince. He's head of creative writing at Brunel University. Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Thorne.
I thought what I was going to do was brave, but then I see people getting arrested and I realise it's not brave at all. I'm mainly a novelist, but I thought for today I would write. It's sort of a poem. It's the 3rd poem I've ever written, and I thought this was a sort of an original thing to do, but then I've been sitting backstage and hearing all the other novelists talking about their writing poems as well. So here's another poem to add to all the others. And it's come from something my children say to me quite a lot whenever they talk about this. And I think one of the amazing things about this is how much it's come from children and how much the younger generation have really helped drive this forward alongside other people who've protested all their lives, longer lives. So this is called But Dad Science. Whenever I'm talking nonsense, which is quite often, my kids have a habit of saying to me, "But Dad, science." They don't need to add any more. Whichever bit of folklore or received wisdom I'm passing on immediately withers in the harsh light of their genuine knowledge. I went to a terrible school where biology was banned because they worried it would encourage students to have babies, mostly with their teachers. The first day in the school laboratory, the teacher said, "You can do anything you like here, apart from sticking scissors in the plug socket." Zap, a flash of light, and a kid thrown across the classroom. But Dad, science. I've only ever wanted to write, and at various times I've met people who think science should be kept out of fiction. They are wrong, of course. When I went to my first ever writing group in Bristol in the 80s, there was a poet there who was also an environmentalist, and he spent his days trying to save the world. The language poets were suspicious, but he wrote the best poetry in the group because he had witnessed the extremes of things, the then new artificial environment of synthetic chemicals, the pollution, the hazardous dumps, the winking out of species. For my children, this might have seemed obvious, but Dad, science. To me, it came as a surprise. I grew up in a generation who were largely suspicious of protest, believing it was better to withdraw in disgust if there was no chance of being heard. But that was a mistake. But Dad, science. Change can only be made if voices are raised in concern. The urge to dismiss is constant and strong. The illusion that time is endless, that things will remain as they always were, does not stand up to scrutiny. But Dad, science. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. See if you can get some things for the rain. Words are our shelter tonight. We're building a shelter with words. This is a wonderful circle. I'm thinking about the word children. I'm thinking about the word love. I'm thinking about the fact that my wife Cassie is in this audience and all our children are at home, and this is for them. And I'm saying that because the next person who is going to speak is someone who's very personally close to me. But the way that he deals with words and reclaims language for us, particularly the language of nature, is a cause always for hope as well as beauty. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Macfarlane.
Hello folks, thank you so much for coming out, thank you for being here. Simon for creating this umbrella of language that is keeping some of the rain off. I have 3 things to read to you tonight. Each of them is short and each of them is different. I want to start with a paragraph from Ursula Le Guin, whose voice was so strong in her life and is still so strong. This is from Ursula Le Guin. She is speaking in 2014, but it is as though she is speaking to us and with us now. Here she is. I think hard times are coming. Well, they are here now, when we will be wanting the voices of writers who can see alternatives to how we live now, can see through our fear-stricken society to other ways of being, and even imagine some real grounds for hope. We will need writers who can remember freedom, poets, visionaries, the realists of a larger reality. We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable, but so did the divine right of kings. Power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begin in art, and very often in our art, the art of words. Thank you, Ursula Le Guin, for that reminder. I'm going to read something that I wrote now, which is a protest poem. It's a poem called Heartwood. I gave it to the protesters in Sheffield, where they were resisting council plans to cut down up to 17,000 street trees in that city, to deforest a city which sounds like an impossibility but is very easily turned into a reality. So I wrote them a poem, I gave it to the city for free. It was turned into incredible art by Nick Hayes, an artist who's in the audience tonight, and by Jackie Morris, another incredible artist of the lost words. And the poem and its art have spread. They've been used now in protests against tree cutting, unnecessary tree felling in Hyderabad, in Mumbai, in India. It's been translated into Telugu, and the art carries its own power too. Here goes Heartwood. Would you hew me to the heartwood cutter? Would you leave me open-hearted? Put an ear to my bark cutter, hear my saps mutter, mark my heartwood's beat. I'm gonna keep going over that noise, my leaves flutter. Would you turn me to timber cutter? Leave me nothing but a heap of logs, a pile of brash. I am a world cutter. I am a maker of life, drinker of rain, breaker of rocks, caster of shade, eater of sun. I am timekeeper, breath giver, deep thinker, cutter. I am a city of butterflies, a country of creatures. But my world takes years to grow, cutter, and seconds to crash. Your saw can fell me, your axe can bring me low. Do you hear these words I utter? I ask this of you. Have you, Heartwood, cutter? Have those who sent you? That is Heartwood, thank you. Okay, I'm going to end with young voices, incredible young voices, indigenous voices. This is a poem written as a dialogue between a young female poet, Akaniviana, who's a Greenlandic poet. She's 23 when she wrote this. And Cathy Netgill Kijina, who's a Marshall Islanders poet. She was 30 when she wrote this. This is a dialogue between someone whose world is melting and someone whose world is being flooded by the consequence of that melting. It is a beautiful duet sung from a sister of ice to a sister of sand, and I'm just going to read a few stanzas from it because it's extraordinary. And it's called Rise. Sister of ocean and sand, can you see our glaciers groaning with the weight of the world's heat? I wait for you here, on the land of my ancestors, heart heavy with a thirst for solutions, as I watch this land change while the world remains silent. Sister of ice and snow, I come to you now in grief, mourning landscapes that are always forced to change, first through wars inflicted on us, then through nuclear waste dumped in our waters on our ice, and now this. Sister of ocean and sand, I offer you these rocks, the foundation of my home. On our journey, may the same unshakable foundation connect us, make us stronger than the colonizing monsters that to this day devour our lives for their pleasure, the very same beasts that now decide who should live, who should die. Sister of ice and snow, I offer you this shell and the story of the two sisters as testament, as declaration that despite everything, we will not leave. Instead, we will choose stone. We will choose to be rooted in this reef forever. From these islands, we ask for solutions. Thank you.
The voices of First Nations, absolutely essential. Thank you, Robert, for bringing that voice of First Nations people. And now, there was going to be an announcement. You're going to make it. Okay.
Hello, thank you all so much for coming. Extinction! Rebellion! Extinction! Rebellion! Extinction! Rebellion! Thank you. My name is Larch. I'm so privileged to be here and doing this work with you. I devote my life to this because this is life and death. What we are doing now is the most important thing any of us will ever do. That's the science. In this movement, we tell the truth. We tell the truth about the climate and ecological crisis. We tell the truth about the science of social change. The science of social change say that we need to build a movement that is respectful, it's non-violent, causes disruption, and it has an element of sacrifice. It's not that we want to get arrested and want to go to prison. The science says that's what we have to do to bring about the change that's needed. I just got released this morning. I was arrested yesterday at City Airport. On Monday, my finger was severely broken, taking this square. And today, if enough of us sit in the road, even if we move when the police ask us to, if all of us sit in the road, we will keep this square. I was released this morning. I'm going to get arrested again tonight if I need to keep this square, because that's what we have to do to bring about the change. So the science of social change says that we need to get around 5,000 people arrested and or 500 people in prison. So far we've got over 1,000 people arrested this rebellion. So we're on our way, but we've still got a lot of work to do. So for those of us that are in a position in our lives where we've worked through the fear barrier and where we've got our personal arrangements in place that we can get arrested, I really encourage us all to do that, for those of us that are able to. And for those of us that aren't, we can support these amazing people on the lock-ons by supporting their well-being. And there's people locked on over there as well in the road. And we can support them by sitting down in the road with them, even if we're going to move when the police ask us to, because what's happening at the moment is the police are being pushed to the limit. When they reach that limit, they will say to the government, we cannot police this, and then the government will meet our demands. So as you all know, we have 3 demands which are so reasonable. It's simply telling the truth, acting now, and getting a citizens' assembly so we can go beyond politics. It's not a big ask. It is really not a big ask. When you're faced with this crisis, it's a very reasonable thing, so it shouldn't be that difficult. So all we have to do is carry on and increase the pressure the way we're doing it. And that involves all of us, everyone now doing what they can. And the last thing I want to say is just to break down that barrier. The way the police will win, if they do, is by divide and rule, and by the fear barrier. And the way we will win is by overcoming the fear barrier and by uniting. So let's not talk about arrestables and non-arrestables. We are in rebellion. This is civil disobedience. Everyone here is arrestable. The police could come and arrest any of us at this point. But those of us that are more able to be arrested are going to be the ones at the front. So we'll do our best in this movement to make sure those of us that are ready and prepared are the ones that get arrested. But we cannot guarantee that. So let's stop talking about arrestables and non-arrestables. We are all in rebellion together, and let's all just step up in every way we can, however that looks. Thank you.